Welcome to Mondays on the Mount. Today is March 28th, 2022, and as you can see, we are taking the show on the road. One of the things I find most compelling and even provocative about the Sermon on the Mount is how Jesus engages with the law. Right after he tells his disciples to be salt and light, he makes what I think is a little bit of a disclaimer for the Sermon on the Mount. He says, paraphrasing, of course, he says, "Don't think that what I'm about to tell you in any way damages the law or the prophets. In fact, not only did I come not to destroy the law, but I came to fulfill the law and the prophets." Which, first of all, is a pretty bold claim. It's a big statement to make, that you're going to be the fulfillment of the entire Old Testament. He makes that statement, though. And then, as you may know, he goes on in the Sermon on the Mount to make these statements, something along the lines of, "You've heard it said," and then he quotes the Old Testament, "but I say to you," and then he has a way of, in a sense, raising the bar on even what the Old Testament says. So as we think about Jesus as the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, I think a reasonable question to ask is this: what is in the front of Jesus's mind when he talks about the law? Like, what does he mean? Is he talking about primarily the ceremonial codes? Is he talking about the laws of temple sacrifices and the different types of offerings that would be brought to the temple? Is he talking about the 613 other rules that we see in the Old Testament? And maybe he's thinking about those things, but maybe he has something different in mind that's really important for us to consider. I'm reminded later in the New Testament when, at a certain time, a scribe, who is basically like a religious or legal scholar, comes up to Jesus and he asks him essentially this question. He says, "Jesus, what is the greatest commandment?" And the way that I phrase that, or I think about that question, is what is the one commandment that really captures the essence of all of the others? Now, Jesus thinks about this question, and then he answers, he gives actually two answers. I love it, because that's just what Jesus does. The first answer that he gives is taken from the Old Testament. He says, the greatest commandment is to love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So it's to be completely devoted to God, but then instead of just leaving it there, Jesus says, and the second is like it. So he doesn't give us an out. He says, love God, but then he says to love your neighbor as yourself. And that command is also taken from the book of Leviticus as well. And so we know that what Jesus thinks about primarily when he thinks about the law is really the law of love, of loving God and loving your neighbor. And of course, Jesus has a moral vision. He does have a code that he asks his disciples to live by. And so we know that this is not in any means a way to simplify Jesus' teaching, but it does give us a lens on how we are to process anything Jesus says, especially though, perhaps even more so, the Sermon on the Mount. And so I want to issue you a challenge today as you can continue to reflect on the Sermon on the Mount. Ask yourself at each and every point of this sermon, how is Jesus' teaching helping me to love God better and to love people better? How are we to be more devoted to God? How are we to be sacrificially loving our neighbors? And I want to just challenge you in that. And every time you think about what Jesus has to say, ask ourselves, how does this help me to love Jesus more? And how does this help me to love my friends and neighbors more deeply? Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week for a next installment of Mondays on the Mount.